Welcome to the Lymphoma Research Foundation's Living Beyond Lymphoma Mindfulness Teleconference. I'm Tammy, and I'll be the moderator for today's call. During today's call, you will hear from expert speakers, and you will have an opportunity to ask questions. If you have questions during today's presentation, you can ask them at any time in the Q&A box on the webinar. If you are listening by phone, you will be able to ask your question during our Q&A session. As a reminder, this teleconference is being recorded. At the end of the program, a link will appear on your screen. Please follow this link to complete an evaluation of this program and gain certification of attendance. If you are listening by phone, this link will be sent to your email at the end of the teleconference. And now, I'm pleased to introduce Jesse Brown. Jesse Brown is the Associate Director of Patient Education at the Lymphoma Research Foundation. Welcome, Jesse.
Thank you, and thank you to each of you for taking the time to join us on today's Living Beyond Lymphoma Mindfulness Teleconference. We have callers from 45 states across the U.S., as well as patients and caregivers from 10 countries around the world. Access to expert disease information is so important, and we are thrilled to be able to bring you this educational program. We have a wonderful program planned for you today, and I'm honored to introduce you to Dr. Giselle K. Perez. Dr. Perez is an assistant professor in psychology at Harvard Medical School and a clinical health psychologist in the Behavioral Medicine Service and the Center for Psychiatric Oncology at Massachusetts General Hospital. Her research focuses on the development of behavioral and mind-body interventions to promote stress management and overall physical and emotional health outcomes for patients throughout the cancer spectrum. Dr. Perez, I'll now turn the call over to you.
Great. Thank you. Thanks so much, everybody, for having me here today. I am excited to have this opportunity to chat with you about mindfulness and the utility of using mind-body practices to help enhance your emotional and physical well-being after cancer treatment. So, for many years, people would respond with equal parts curiosity and disbelief when someone would bring up the idea of mind-body medicine, even as a complement to modern medicine. While mind-body medicine has certainly grown in popularity, there remains some conflict between interest and uncertainty. Much of this stems from having a general lack of clarity about what mind-body medicine actually is and how it works. There's also the frustration that people often experience when trying a popular mind-body technique like meditation and then feeling like it doesn't measure up to all the excitement people report. So people then chalk up not liking it to failing or doing mind-body wrong, quote unquote, or believing that mind-body is just not for them. So I hope that by the end of today, you'll have a better understanding about mind-body medicine and how its strategies can help you feel better and more in control despite living with the uncontrollable. But before we can talk about the benefits of mind-body medicine, we do need to start a discussion with stress. Now, I know you might ask yourself, why are we talking about stress when this is supposed to be a conversation about lymphoma and mind-body medicine? Well, it makes sense if you think about cancer and cancer treatment and everything else that happens after cancer treatment as being one of just many big demands and challenges that contribute to us feeling stress. So what is this thing that we call stress? We all have had days when we feel out of sorts. It's normal, right? Most of us can identify moments when we think we're experiencing stress, but what is stress really? This is an important question because at times we can become so used to experiencing stress that we may not even realize that we're experiencing it. And then this makes it just that much harder to intervene and prevent stress from having negative consequences in our daily lives. So we need to take a step back. What do we mean by stress? Stress researchers define stress as a non-specific response of the body to any demand. So in other words, stress is our body's response to a demand. These demands, or challenges if you want to call them that, can be major life events such as having cancer and cancer treatment, or they can be small daily hassles like getting stuck in traffic or getting late to work. They can also be good things like going on vacation. So by definition, it's completely normal and even appropriate to experience stress. But stress becomes a problem when it outweighs our ability to cope. So Lazarus and Folkman use a model to describe the role of perception in our experience of stress. Specifically, If we perceive ourselves as having few demands and we perceive ourselves as having the resources to manage those demands, then the amount of stress that we feel is small. Some may even consider this to be a more positive stress. However, when we perceive ourselves as having many demands, large demands, more than the resources we have to manage, then that's when we feel high levels of stress. Distress, then, is our negative emotional reaction to this perceived imbalance. So what does stress look like? How does our body respond to these demands? Walter Cannon coined the phrase the flight or fight response to describe the set of physiological challenges that happen inside our bodies in response to real or perceived danger. So this fight or flight response is our body's alarm system. It ultimately serves an evolutionary purpose. Essentially, the body has an automatic, prepared response to keep you alive when you are facing something dangerous. Think way back when we had to live with lions and tigers and bears, oh my. If we were to encounter a tiger in the forest, what would be the best way to respond? If we take a step back and evaluate the situation and then plan a response, we run the risk of being attacked. Instead, it makes sense to respond quickly to escape from the danger. So our body needs to react quickly, almost without thinking, in order to keep us safe. So our body essentially responds to stress in a way that is meant to protect us, but in doing that, it doesn't make us feel comfortable. Think about what needs to happen to protect your body from danger, like an attack from a lion. You need your big muscles to function, like your legs and your back, in order to keep yourself upright and moving. You don't, however, need to digest food while protecting yourself. If anything, that's counterproductive and a misuse of your resources. So in response to danger, your body activates its alarm system, the sympathetic nervous system. This allows your body to shut down or redirect resources to the areas of the body that you need to respond to danger. For instance, blood is moved away from the places you don't need, like your stomach, hands, and feet, and then it's moved to the places that you do need to defend yourself, like your major muscle groups. But what that actually feels like is cold fingers, a pounding heart, headache, dizziness, breathlessness, indigestion. You might also notice that these are a lot of the things that you experience when you're feeling panic, or these are a lot of the same symptoms that you probably experience after cancer treatment. You may notice even when you're having a panic attack that you're starting to sweat. Again, your body's trying to help you. In this case, sweating prevents you from overheating. So if your body's trying to help you, you might ask yourself, why then is the stress response a problem? Well, it's not a problem if you find yourself in this situation fighting a bear, but it is a problem when it gets triggered by daily stressors or worries. When things like driving, going grocery shopping, work, or simply thinking about having to talk to your provider, thinking about how, the things that maybe a conversation that you forgot or a mistake that you made at work. All of these things essentially trigger that same physiological response that happens as if you are being attacked by a bear. In fact, our brain can have some difficulty telling the difference between real and perceived danger, especially if we experience challenges and worry on a regular basis. And negative thoughts and emotions, such as worry and sad mood, all of those things trigger this same stress response, leading to the same uncomfortable bodily sensations, which what actually happens often is that people start to mistake these symptoms as indicators of disease, perhaps return of disease, making them even focus more on those parts of the body that don't feel good. In return, simply paying attention to these symptoms makes them feel stronger because the alarm system is going off even more so, that stress system. So again, our body is constantly trying to help us. So the stress response doesn't last very long. And usually our body is able to calm itself down by shutting off that stress response. However, continued activation and deactivation of your stress response can overload your body. Think about what happens to a machine. If you turn it on and off, on and off, on and off, over time, you'll find that you may wear it down to the point that it breaks down. And like a machine, our body too can begin to shut down. And you might find that maybe after a great vacation, you actually end up with a cold. And that's sort of what it's like. We use the term allostatic load to refer to that wear and tear that stress can have on our body. Essentially, your body is working overtime to manage these stressors, these demands. There's also differences, and I think this is really important, especially for individuals treated for cancer, in terms of how we process information. So if you perceive, and unfortunately that you can't see this too well on the screen, but if you perceive something as a threat, the lower part of your brain, the amygdala, the emotional processing center of the brain, is activated first. So essentially, you are thinking with an emotional brain, the react before you think part of the brain. So what this means is that you're not thinking clearly. Your brain is simply not in a position to do so because it's thinking in a way that's just intended to protect you from harm. What does this look like? Think of a glass full of muddied water. When you're in a state of distress, it's as if that glass is constantly being shaken. So that mud represents your thoughts, right? So if you're continuing to shake that glass, it makes it very difficult to look through. And that's what it feels like when you're having difficulty concentrating or focusing. It's because you're sort of in that stress response. Your brain, again, is not in a position to think clearly, but rather to think more so with its emotions. However, when you're in that relaxed state, so when that alarm system is off, you're engaging a more top-down approach when you're processing information. So you're thinking clearly. You're thinking before you react. So in using that thinking part of the brain, it's as if you settle that glass and all those thoughts, the mud here, sort of settle to the bottom. And now you're able to think more clearly and rationalize before you act. So I do want to emphasize, stress is not a bad thing, and we do need it to respond to challenges. Otherwise, you might find that you don't get things done. And sometimes this happens when people feel sort of like they're stuck, that frozen response, or maybe where they have so much depressed mood that they just don't have enough sort of to get them moving and activated. So with this foundation, let's shift to thinking about how mind-body medicine can be helpful. I start with the concept of resilience. One of the key ways we can support ourselves is to take a wellness approach by learning strategies to manage life challenges, such as all the things that happen after cancer treatment. In a sense, we can build our resilience, which broadly defined means adapting and maintaining effective functioning under stressful life events. So there are many key features of individuals who are resilient, many that are outlined here. Key characteristics include having a sense of optimism, not thinking the world is Pollyanna, wonderful all the time, but being able to balance the adverse circumstances with also finding the silver lining in situations. Having a sense of humor to cope with stressful situations, facing fears, while also regulating one's emotions and finding meaning in adverse situations. So those are just some things that are sort of at the inner scope of resilience. And the idea really is that the chief cause of stress is reality. We don't have the ability to control or take away that stress, and I wish I had a magic wand to do that. But what we do have is the ability to control how we respond to stressful situations. So that takes us to mind-body medicine. The field of mind-body medicine has this wellness approach. It is based on the recognition that our thoughts, emotions, behaviors, relationships, all of those things can have a profound effect on the body and vice versa. And we now know that 60 to 90% of all visits to primary care doctors are actually for stress-related conditions. And relatedly, studies have shown that mind-body medicine is actually often the most effective way to reduce symptoms, treat, and prevent stress. Accordingly, mind-body medicine teaches and uses a set of tools and techniques to help our mind influence our body. And the way they work is, remember that alarm system? Mind-body practices work on deactivating our stress response, that alarm system, by upregulating the rest and relax part of our nervous system. In a sense, all the things that are going haywire inside of us when we're stressed are brought down to baseline. And there are a number of different intervention strategies that it's sort of techniques that mind-body medicine uses to promote the sense of health. This is key. what I find is that people often have a preconceived notion about what mind-body strategies are. And then they try one, the one that they think should be the right mind-body strategy, and then they end up not liking it. And then they decide, okay, I don't like mind-body approaches altogether. What I want to emphasize is that there are many different techniques, and what you have to do is find the one that works best for you when you broaden your definition of mind-body techniques. It's like going shoe shopping. Sometimes the shoe doesn't always fit, and it takes a while to find the right one. And what we're trying to do with mind-body medicine and building that resilience is a recognition that life is stressful. Okay, we need to validate that. That's reality. But in incorporating mind-body practices, what you're trying to do is to tip the balance in favor of health. You're trying to build your resources to manage those demands that you're ultimately faced with. So at the Benson Henry Mind-Body Institute, which I'm affiliated with, one of the things we believe is that underlies the use of mind-body techniques is the relaxation response. As defined, the relaxation response is a hypometabolic physiological state that can be elicited by using mind-body techniques like meditation, yoga, tai chi. So this physiological state is the opposite of the alarm state, the stress response. And what this physiological state does is it turns off that inner dialogue, the inner worries, the inner thoughts, by deactivating the stress response. The way it's experienced is as a state of profound rest. Because of how the relaxation response works, it helps people correct their unhelpful responses to stress by quieting that alarm system of the body. This allows you to focus, understand the challenges you're facing better, and then choose a response that's more in line with how you want to respond. And then that is ultimately what your control will be. To elicit the relaxation response, you need two things to happen at the same time. The first one is involving a sense of repetition. You need to create an anchor of some sorts for your mind, and you do this by focusing on a tool. It could be repetition of a word, like chanting a sound, prayer, thought, a phrase, or even muscular activity like rocking or rowing. But the idea is that you need a tool that you repeat to anchor your mind. Next, you need to maintain a quiet sense of awareness and a non-judging attitude. Think of this process being like a boat anchored to a dock. A current may try to take your boat away, but the anchor gently brings it back. Similarly, worries work in that way. Worry thoughts or thoughts that about the future or the past may try to distract you, and what you do is simply recognize that these thoughts are here, and without judging, bring your attention back to the anchor you have chosen. And these steps break the train of everyday thought and ultimately help quiet that alarm system in your body. So anything that breaks the train of everyday thought will create this physiological state. There's the standard techniques that people commonly hear about, like meditation, diaphragmatic breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, but then there's everything else. This includes repetitive sports like running, swimming, biking, walking, yoga, knitting, crocheting, playing, listening to music. This is important because you are already doing something, I'm confident, something that can elicit the relaxation response. The difference is if you're using it in a purposeful way with intent as opposed to in a passive way. So let's say you like going for a walk. You can probably remember instances where you go for a walk and at the end of the walk you feel like, you don't feel any better. You don't feel like any different. It's sort of just something that you did. And then you can probably remember other times when you went for a walk and at the end you felt really good. Part of the difference between the two is that moment when you felt really good was when you were probably focusing on the walk with intent as opposed to letting your mind wander to worries. So that's the difference. It's engaging in something that's repetitive and returning your attention to that repetitive stimulus. And that is why I think mindfulness is one of the most simplest and popular ways to elicit the relaxation response. If you immerse yourself in the experience You can say you are essentially practicing it mindfully. You are, in fact, tuning into all of your senses to observe your experience in the moment as it is, instead of letting our minds wander to thoughts or worries about the past or the future. So when you're brushing your teeth, simply brush your teeth. What do the bristles feel like? Is the water cool, warm? Can you feel the bubbles of the toothpaste on your tongue? Or chocolate lovers, how slowly can you eat that piece of chocolate? Can you unwrap it slowly? And when you do, can you smell the chocolate just emanating from the wrapper? Can you see the surface of the chocolate? Do you notice something that maybe you haven't noticed before? Can you slow down enough to smell it, to feel it, to taste it? What feelings or sensations come up as you take a bite? When you take a bite, can you let the chocolate melt slowly in your mouth? And what do you notice if you do so? Practice mindfulness when you're walking. Listen to the cadence of your step. Look at the trees. Observe the color. Feel the sun against your skin. When you're listening to music, can you hear the different instruments? Can you hear the different sounds? In a nutshell, mindfulness allows you to take any experience you're doing and turn it into something that quiets the body's alarm response. And it essentially makes you, whatever experience you're doing, that much more enjoyable. Guided imagery is another exercise, which again, it pulls on mindfulness because it requires you to be in the moment, but it involves the use of words and music to create a positive image. I like guided imagery because it's a strong anchor for me. If you ask me, I frankly don't like sitting still with my mind, just meditating, trying to clear it. I find that to be really hard, but I can listen to a story. And anyone can listen to a story if you find the one that works for you. If you find a meadow peaceful, search for a guided imagery exercise that walks you through a meadow or a forest. If you like the water, look for one that places you by the beach or on a boat. Same as with mindfulness, purposefully engage all of your senses to recreate the scene that is being narrated. And this process will help with quieting your mind and your body. And I have a guided imagery exercise that we can do if we do have some time at the end, but I won't do that at this moment. Another strategy that you can use, again, the idea is you're trying to deactivate that stress response by upregulating the rest and relax part of the nervous system, okay? Another exercise that I love is the use of minis. Minis are what they sound like, mini relaxation response exercises. So if you find that you just don't like doing something for 10, 15, 20 minutes, but you want to try this, well, this is the way you sort of, if you haven't swam before, this is how you sort of go into the shallow end and learn how to stroke before you go into the deep end. So minis are brief and ideal ways to counter stress throughout the day. So you use them often, and they have a build-up approach. So similar to exercise, you don't have to do all 30, 45 minutes at once. You can do several periods throughout the day, and that has a build-up effect. So do minis. If you do them several times throughout the day, they sort of help readjust that baseline. So minis can take the form of several different things. They can be a single breath, a stretch, a sound, okay? It's different from just sighing with like an exasperated sigh. This one is a purposeful time out. You're basically removing yourself from any given situation and taking a couple of, one or two breaths or doing some stretches for a few moments before you engage. So I encourage you to think about how you can fit minis throughout the day. That's sort of a reset button. I often tell people, if you're about to enter a difficult conversation, do a couple of minis so that you deactivate that stress response and then you're more focused. You're thinking with the frontal part of your brain, the think before you speak part. Okay? Maybe practice a mini when you're getting on the elevator. Practice a mini before you get in the car or after you've, finished driving. And remind yourself to do these throughout the day. I actually ask people, buy those yellow office dots, something that serves as a reminder sticker that you put around your house or your office to serve as a reminder to practice a mini. So put them on top of something that you anticipate might be a stressor. Some people put them on their phones. Some people put them outside their office door. Some people put them on their spouse's forehead. Whatever works for you, put them around places that will remind you to take that time out so you can sort of hit that reset button so that you are in a more balanced state before you engage in something that could potentially be stressful for you. There are also things that we call experiential minis. So if you want something that's more concrete, more tangible, essentially what you're doing is creating an image in your mind. In this one, you pretend there's a piece of colored paper in front of you. So you close your eyes and envision a piece of colored paper, and then you have a crayon in your hand. And what you do is you start in the left bottom corner of the paper and slowly draw the first side of a square. Then slowly move your hand up the page, across the page, down the right-hand corner of the page to the bottom, and then slowly connect the line across the bottom of the page. So you might do that same thing, just a little slower, but again, it's serving the same purpose of deactivating that stress response, shutting off that internal narrative that triggers the stress response, and ultimately helps you be centered in the midst of stressors. The last piece here, and I won't spend too much time, but this is another important piece that helps prolong that sense of centeredness. We do this a lot. We call these coping logs. Remember how I said earlier on that our thoughts act as triggers for the stress response. So they trigger that same response as if we're fighting a bear. And those thoughts come from our emotional mind, because when we're in the stress response, we're thinking with our emotional processing center. What that means is the thoughts that we have aren't necessarily always accurate. They're missing information. So what this coping log does, it helps you realize what are the things that you're feeling and what are the things that you're telling yourself that's fueling those emotions. And then identify how accurate are those thoughts. And then what is another way that maybe you can look at the situation that incorporates all, potential possibilities. Okay? So in effect, the term that we often use as psychologists here is put your thoughts on trial. If you're thinking with an emotional mind and you present your thoughts to a jury, the likelihood is that they won't necessarily agree with your evidence. I feel, therefore it is. So this forces you to say, okay, I believe that this bad thing is going to happen. Well, what evidence do I have that this bad thing is going to happen? I have my worries, but what else do I have? And then in this, with working out your thoughts, what you're then able to do is decide if the thoughts are accurate. Are there things that I can control? And then you shift to problem solving. For those things that you can't control and that they're accurate, then you shift to acceptance-based coping strategies. And that's where mindfulness and other mind-body strategies come into play. Okay, so we know these strategies are helpful, and how helpful, in what ways, and where can we see them, what can we do with them? Well, the benefits of the relaxation response brought about by mind-body medicine, of which mindfulness is just one technique, it deactivates the stress response. So all the things that are going haywire, the heart rate, the difficulties breathing, the high blood pressure, the pain, the intense pain, the difficulty sleeping, all those things improve with use of these mind-body strategies. So what you'll see is that there's a decrease in heart rate and blood pressure down to a baseline. There's improved immune functioning. There's better digestion. There's a decrease in pain, better sleep, less anxiety, less fear. There's a sense of control and an opportunity to think more clearly, which I think is particularly important for people who feel like they have sort of like chemo brain, where they already have what we know is difficulty focusing, but then that difficulty focusing might be exacerbated by the stress response. So when you're using a mind-body strategy, you find that you actually might be able to think much more clearly. And then more specifically within cancer, then what we know and what we've been able to see is that mind-body tools, such as mindfulness being one of the techniques, helps with coping with treatment side effects. So it doesn't completely eliminate pain and nausea, but it does reduce the perception of pain. It reduces nausea, especially the anticipatory nausea, if you find that you're having some nausea as you're approaching where you were treated. It helps you manage uncertainty. I work a lot with my patients in terms of what that means and how to use these strategies to cope with it. It helps with insomnia. Health behavior. So if smoking is a way that people use to cope with stressors, it helps with quitting, preparing for surgery, or even shifting and preparing for difficult phone calls with your provider. And also, as social beings, it helps us learn how to engage our social support network so we are able to utilize and work with people and make that connection that we want to make. That's so important to us. So when the only tool you have is a hammer, you tend to treat everything as if there were a nail. Different situations sometimes call for different tools. And what mind-body approaches do is help arm you with a diverse set of techniques that can help offset life's challenges and help you feel more empowered and thus in control. And with that, I encourage you, I invite you to more fully and non-judgmentally immerse yourself in the experience you want to enjoy more fully, perhaps seeing the world for the first time as if you were seeing it from a child's point of view. Thank you so much for having me here today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Perez. So before we open the program to questions, I want to share information with you on the Lymphoma Research Foundation that may be helpful to you as you navigate lymphoma and long-term survivorship. The Lymphoma Research Foundation is the nation's largest nonprofit dedicated exclusively to lymphoma. Our mission is to eradicate this disease through investment in the most promising lymphoma research and to serve those impacted by lymphoma through quality education and support opportunities. As we continue to make progress in advancing lymphoma research, we also want to ensure that you have access to the latest information about your disease. The Foundation provides comprehensive disease and treatment-specific resources, programs, and services, all of which are offered free of charge and have been reviewed by lymphoma experts. Most relevant to today's call, LRF offers a variety of lymphoma-specific resources, many of which you can access at the bottom of your screen if you are utilizing the web link or via LRF's website at lymphoma.org if you are on the phone. The LRF helpline can answer your specific questions about living with lymphoma, as well as discuss relevant treatment options and clinical trials. We also offer a variety of publications that have been reviewed by experts to ensure that you have access to the latest information. We have an integrative oncology and lymphoma survivorship fact sheet, which can be found on our website or can be ordered for free through our helpline. Finally, our mobile app, Focus on Lymphoma, is an award-winning app that provides patients and caregivers access to comprehensive content, as well as unique tools to help manage your disease. The app is available for free download in the Apple App Store and in Google Play, and I would encourage you all to download the app today. And last, but certainly not least, for those of you who may be looking to give back and help continue to advance lymphoma research, I would encourage you to join Team LRF. We offer a variety of walks and rides for you to participate in, or you could turn your talents and passions into ways to raise funds for lymphoma research. Through Team LRF, you can meet others who have been impacted by this disease and join a community of individuals committed to impacting lives by finding cures for lymphoma. I really hope that you will take advantage of some of these great resources and services that the Lymphoma Research Foundation provides. If you have questions regarding what you learned today, or you need information about relevant treatment options and supportive care resources, you can reach out to the Lymphoma Research Foundation through our website at lymphoma.org or by calling our helpline at 1-800-500-9976. Thank you all again for your time today, and with that, I will turn the call over to our moderator to open the program for questions.
Thank you. If you'd like to ask a question, please press star 1 on your telephone keypad. We will take as many questions as possible. If you have a question that does not get answered, you can always reach out to the Lymphoma Research Foundation's helpline at 800-500-9976. And we do have our first question, and it asks, how should I manage my stress when, if my loved ones around me are stressed about me having cancer and all that comes with that?
That's a great question. So when, as a patient, I think what happens with a person who has cancer is you sort of almost feel like you have to protect your loved ones. You have this need, because you don't want to sort of burden them, but at the same time you want to have their support. And part of what I encourage people to do is to be okay communicating what the needs are. So what loved ones are going to experience is stress, and same as you, right? You have your internal experiences, and you're trying to work through them in the way that you can. What loved ones feel stressed about in particular is wanting to help and feeling like they don't have the knowledge about how to help. And then that comes across as you experiencing their stress and distress. So one of the best ways that you can help yourself and help them is by letting them know what works and what doesn't work. And that is actually often more welcomed, because what happens often is that they're sort of in the dark. They don't know what the right or wrong thing to do is, because there is no right or wrong. It's all sort of personal. So my recommendation is to be able to tell your loved ones, like, okay, I hear that you're worrying about this, and I understand that. I appreciate your worries, but right now what would help me is, when you're experiencing some stress, maybe if you can find another outlet, maybe talking to another person, or maybe, it's okay if you want to talk about what my upcoming treatment plan might be, but I don't necessarily want to talk about that. But you know what, if you're having that conversation, what would be really helpful is having that in a different room. But communication is the biggest piece here in terms of allowing yourself to be okay telling people what your needs are, and more often than not, they want to know.
All right, thank you. Our next question asks, how do you recommend talking to my employer about the effects of stress from cancer treatment on my professional life and work?
So, that's another great question, and I think the answer to that might vary depending on your employer, how comfortable you feel with your employer, how well they know your situation, how long you have been there. I think finding someone you can confide in is going to be particularly important, so that you understand sort of what the environment is like at work. And I think feeling comfortable to share just the amount of information that you need. Again, this aspect of communication. So maybe, I think the hard part with this answer is I may need a little bit more specifics, because I always encourage people to not share more than they feel comfortable doing. If you need some time, either because you feel like you're being inundated with work, then being able to communicate, what the pace might be for you, being able to communicate, arrive at a compromise as to what their expectations are for you, and then sort of sitting back with your family and deciding, what does work, what doesn't work. Can you work a full-time job, or is it that you want to work only part-time? If you only want to work part-time, then that's a conversation that you have to have with your employer. If it's just that you feel that they're maybe throwing too much information at you, or too much expectations are thrown at you, then it's being able to tell them, okay, I am confident that I can handle X, Y, and Z, but right now I don't feel okay with, or I don't feel that I can accomplish this specific task. So I'm having some trouble sort of responding to this, because I think it's a case-by-case basis depending on what the specific issue may be. And I'm open to, if you want to spend some time clarifying, that would be certainly okay too.
All right, thank you. We have another question. This comes from the phone audience. So Beth, please go ahead with your question after you hear your line has been unmuted.
Okay. If you have like a mental illness, a bipolar, and then you have cancer, how can you get the mindfulness that you were just talking about into play?
Okay. So I'd love to hear, regardless of whether you have a mental illness, bipolar, or any other mental illnesses, mindfulness can still be something that would be beneficial to you. And I think part of what I would encourage you to do is to identify what might be some of the challenges that you experience in trying to practice it. So if you're still on the line, I'd love to hear maybe some challenges that you think that might be prohibitive.
Well, it's when you're in like the manic stage sometimes, even with the medication now, is that you just have a repetitive bad experiences. In the sense of I'm going to die, but everything's okay and you're in remission, but you can't get into that, type of situation. It's like, no, you're in remission for a year. Go and have a good life, and then you just keep on playing it back that you're going to die. So,
okay.
With the bipolar.
Yeah, so that's really helpful. And you're talking about if, for instance, you were in a manic state, so or even not, because these are experiences that people have, even without being in a state of mania. But the first thing I would say is certainly making sure that you are speaking with your providers regarding medications to make sure that there is some, if you are experiencing some hyper mood, then hyperactivity, then ensuring that they are aware that this is happening so they can make adjustments if needed. But this other aspect that you're speaking to, which is shutting off that narrative, that piece is hard. And I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to say that this is going to happen overnight. But what you're describing is finding another tool. Because dispelling, you're not here, mindfulness or any other mind-body strategy is not here to have you lie to yourself, right? The worries are there, the fears are there, and they're valid. So if you start denying them, then you're actually not necessarily helpful. It's like a bad song. It comes back with a vengeance. So the ignoring part, the pretending it doesn't exist in terms of worries, that's not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do with mindfulness is finding something, or any other strategy, finding something that is a strong enough anchor for you so that you can sort of shut off that mental that narrative. So if you find your mind is wandering, right, it will happen. So no matter that's actually how you know you're doing it right. So if you find your mind is wandering when you're just going for a walk, then maybe you need to try something else. Maybe instead practice mindfulness with something that's more tangible, like if you enjoy eating ice cream, or if you enjoy, if you have a pet and you have an animal and you just enjoy stroking your pet, I would encourage you to find a different exercise. And every time your mind wanders, not saying, oh, it's okay, I know I have to be present. No, not engaging in that. It's basically recognizing, okay, my mind is there, let me bring it back to petting my dog, okay? And that process of recognizing mind wanders, bring it back, mind wanders, bring it back, that is what will sort of enter you into that trance. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It helps because then, I can refocus. And that's what you're saying. Go pet my rabbit or whatever. And
exactly. Exactly, and that's why I'm so glad you brought this question up, because that's key. We often think that, okay, well, our mind is going, therefore we're doing it wrong, and actually no, that's how you know you're doing it right. If it's happening too often, then maybe you need to shift gears and try something else. So I like animals because I find that that's tangible. I can easily anchor my mind to the feeling of their fur, and there's that emotional connection, right? So your mind is going to wander. You're going to have those fears, and I'm not trying to say forget them. What I'm saying is when you're practicing mindfulness or another mind-body strategy, what you're saying essentially is, there they are. There are my thoughts. Let me bring it back to petting my pet.
Now that helps.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question asks, how much time should I allow for guided imagery, and where can I find more resources?
Great question. I say, if you're looking at the research, they suggest 15, 20 minutes, even maybe upwards 20 minutes. My recommendation for you is, if you haven't done it before, start off small. So And I say that because when you start off small and you start having the successes, then you start going up in time. So you can do a 5 to 7 minute guided imagery exercise. Sometimes I say just go through Google, and if you Google, guided imagery beach, then you'll have a couple of different ones show up. And they might be 5 minutes, they might be 12 minutes, they might be 20 minutes. So you can choose an experiment. They also, if you have an iPhone, you go to iTunes, they also have many different resources there. There are some apps as well that I recommend. One is Calm. That they have an unpaid version and a paid version. Obviously, the one if you pay, it gives you more options. But the simplest form is just Googling, and you will find so many resources. But the biggest key is not so much time, because you can keep telling yourself, I'm going to do 15 minutes. But then what happens is if you try to do 15 minutes, but you're not completely sold on what you want to do, then when you don't do it, you fall off the bandwagon, all or nothing thinking. So what I say is pick something that's 5 minutes. Stick to it, and then once you get used to it, then you can try to up the time. The time doesn't matter as much as just the process of doing.
All right, thank you. We do have another question from the phones. Catherine, please go ahead after you hear your line has been unmuted.
Hi, I'm a survivor of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, large B-cell diffuse. I was diagnosed in December 4th of 2015, and the next day I started R-CHOP chemotherapy, 6 treatments, 3 weeks apart. Well, the wonderful news is it's now 3 years and 4 months later. My oncologist has told me at the 3-year mark of the 3 years and 4 months at the end of chemo. At the end of chemo, the 3-year mark, if the cancer hasn't returned, then it's gone away and it won't come back to me. And that has made me very, very happy. But in its wake, it has left a terrible fatigue. Now, I've survived 2 other serious cancers. One 18 years ago, uterine cancer. One 9 years ago, breast cancer. Neither one has returned. And so I'm very grateful for all of this. But I am so tired. I drag myself around. I can hardly get up and get my chores done. Very often they aren't done at all. What can I do to get my energy back?
Great question. So fatigue, as we all know, is actually one of the biggest side effects that people treated for lymphoma are struggling with. We know fatigue is prominent in cancer populations in general, but I think that the rates are actually higher in individuals treated for lymphoma. So one of the things that you need to do to manage your fatigue is, believe it or not, get yourself moving in different ways. Okay, so the first piece is this. What we know is that the amount, what interferes with your quality of life more is the amount that fatigue interferes with your life more so than the intensity of the fatigue. Okay, so fatigue interference is one thing, and then fatigue intensity is another thing. So what we say is get to know your fatigue. What you might find if you start documenting fatigue levels, usually, and you might see your provider uses a scale of 1 to 10 for pain, fatigue, other things. I want you to start using that scale on a daily basis and several times throughout the day. Rate your level of fatigue from 1 to 10, 10 being the most fatigue and 1 being the least amount of fatigue. And based on your fatigue level, that's how you're going to decide what activities that you're doing. Okay, so if your fatigue level is an 8, 9, 10, then in that sense, that should be maybe a low activity day, right? But if your fatigue level is maybe 6, 7, 8, so still, enough fatigue that is bothersome, but you have just enough energy to do an activity. In that sense, on that day, I want you to think about what the activities you want to do, what they are, and then break them into pieces. That's what we call activity pacing. So for instance, if you want to do laundry, then instead of doing your entire laundry for the day all at once, maybe what you would do is You get the clothes, put them together, and then, bring them downstairs. And then you take a break. Okay? And then, after a specified break period of time, then you go ahead and you put them in the wash. Then you take a break. Then you take them out. Do you see what I'm saying? So essentially what I encourage people to do is break the activities down into doable chunks when their fatigue levels are moderate so that you don't burn yourself out. Because the important piece is trying to keep yourself moving. The more that you do, what you'll note, and we document pre and post fatigue, what you'll find is that when you actually engage in the activity that you otherwise would have avoided, your fatigue level actually either stays the same or improves. And you'll also notice that your mood slightly improves as well. Okay? So basically, get to know your fatigue. Know what your low fatigue days are like and what activities you can do on those low fatigue days. Know what your moderate fatigue days are like, and then what activities you can cut into chunks. And then have a fallback plan for those days that you just can't get up. Okay? And then the more that you keep yourself going, the more that you'll fall into that pattern. Because the other thing that I want to emphasize here is that fatigue, if you start looking at your fatigue signals, they look a lot like stress signals. Stress makes fatigue worse. And what makes you stressed is when you start talking to yourself about, oh my God, there we go, I can't do this activity, look how much my life has changed. And yes, your life has changed. But then thinking about the way it has changed and then getting upset, as you should, about the changes will make your fatigue worse. Okay? So activity pacing, get to know your fatigue, and understand how stress looks a lot like fatigue and how they work together to make the fatigue worse. I hope that answers your question, or if you have a follow-up, please let me know.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you. Our next question reads, how do I manage the stress I get from my loved ones who feel I should stop dwelling on my survivorship phase now that my lymphoma has been cured?
Oh, that's a great question. Oh, you got to love that. So cancer's done. Everybody celebrate. And that's not the case, right? Everybody seems to keep moving forward, and then you seem to be sort of left behind trying to figure out what the pieces are and putting them together. Life has changed, and that's inevitable. Part of the work, though, is understanding, and this is a challenge. I'm not going to say that this is easy. What family is responding to is still not knowing. They don't walk in your shoes. They don't understand the complexity of what life post-treatment is like. And they can't quite capture that. And similar to what you might have found with losing, not having the same social support even during cancer treatment, is that sometimes people can't, in a nice way, they can't quite handle it. And it's not to their fault, because even without having had lymphoma, I'm sure many of you might remember those instances where it was hard to understand what that would be like. So part of my work with managing those stressors is taking that step back and understanding that the way family is responding or friends are responding, although it's towards you, it has nothing to do with you. And that's a hard piece that's a hard pill to swallow. But if you can look at their response as being a response to their internal stress, okay, then it's able to sort of remove yourself, create some distance. Okay, they're basically, they need to move on. And that's the way they cope. And unfortunately, they're unable at this time to offer the support that I need. So then that leaves you with figuring out, okay, where can I get the support that I need? Because I need that. Where can I get the emotional support when I want to chat about, when I just need to vent about the worries that I have? Maybe it's not chatting with them, but I understand that it's not because there's something wrong with me, but rather it's something about them and their need to manage their own stress response.
Thank you.
I hope that clarifies a bit.
I apologize. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Our next question asks, how do you recommend I share mind-body techniques with my family if they seem unopen to it?
That's a great one. All great questions. Oh, I love this. Most people love food, right? I'd say one of the best ways is to then practice it with mindful eating. So I presented one example, eating chocolate. You can do this with actually going out to a good meal and say, you know what, humor me. Let's just eat this meal mindfully. And most people will latch onto that because if it's a delicious dinner or a special baked good, they can sort of tune their attention to the taste. And I make it more interactive. So, sometimes with children, I say, can you taste, like, what's this cake made out of? And, can you taste the individual ingredients? And it forces people to eat it slowly. Okay? So that's one way. I try to maybe find something that's more appealing to them, because remember one of the earlier things that I mentioned is that mind-body strategies can actually be almost anything. So another way is just if there's an activity, a physical activity they like to do, such as yoga, or if it's going for a walk or biking. Sometimes helping people understand what mind-body medicine actually is, what it's actually doing, then it takes away that sort of, stigma. I don't know if stigma is but again, the preconceived beliefs that people have about what it is, which is this fluffy style of medicine. So try mindful eating. Try engaging them in an activity such as walking or biking or yoga, even stretching. And one other thing is actually, if they're willing to humor you, have them take a deep breath, stretching the diaphragm. Stretching the diaphragm muscle, and that's hard. People don't often breathe that way. They breathe superficially. The way you know you're breathing with your diaphragmatic muscles is if your belly is expanding more so than your chest. Stretching that diaphragm automatically forces your body to relax, and people can see the difference. So your body cannot be physiologically stressed and relaxed at the same time. So if you tell someone, you know what, humor me, just take a step back and let's practice deep breathing by stretching that diaphragm, what you'll notice is that they will notice a change in how their heart rate is, how their heart is beating, or even how they're feeling.
Right. Thank you. Our next question asks, if facing a relapse and knowing you will eventually need more chemo, how can we distinguish between normally daily anxiety, to be expected given the circumstances, and being overly focused on waiting for that other shoe to drop?
Great question. What you're describing is, I think it's the topic of the day, this issue of living with uncertainty. And part of this balance is acknowledging, right? We can't, and what people say is, don't worry about it, don't forget about it, but that's so much easier said than done. So part of what you're describing is acknowledging these are your worries, and this is a potential fear. But it's something that could happen, and you have to be realistic about it. But then the other piece, the coping piece, is sitting there and also acknowledging that you can't foretell the future. You can't predict. And sitting with those worries, as valid as they may be, is not necessarily helping you feel better. So where do you want to be? How do you want to feel? When you make these changes, when you use mind-body strategies, it shouldn't be to feel better for someone else. It should be to move you closer to where you want to feel. So this uncertainty, this sort of curtain that's pulled to the side that nobody else can understand but you have to live, that's your reality. So acknowledge and validate that fear exists, but then decide for yourself, do I want to sit with this emotion, or do I want to feel different? And what is that different? And then that's when you, in acknowledging the anxiety, you're basically saying, okay, I see that that's there, but I don't want to feel this way. So this, I'm going to choose to go for a walk and focus my mind on the walk, or I'm going to choose to play with, my child or my grandchild, or I'm going to choose to play with my dog or my cat. But that's a purposeful intentional shift that you're making, not ignoring your anxiety or ignoring what may happen, but telling yourself that focusing on it right now is not going to change or even predict the future any better. That is taking control.
All right, thank you. And with that, I will turn it back to Jessie.
Thank you again to each of you for joining us on today's call, and we hope you found the information both informative and also hopeful. Also, in just a few moments at the conclusion of this program, a link will appear on your screen for those of you accessing via the webinar, and an email will be sent to those listening by phone prompting you to complete a program evaluation. I would ask that you please take a few moments to complete this brief evaluation, as these are really important for helping us to ensure we deliver the most useful and meaningful programming to you. And with that, I'd like to thank you all again for joining us today, and have a wonderful day.